June 24, 1812. 500,000 men stare across the Niemen River, the largest military force ever assembled. They are about to march into the Russian Empire. But look closer at this kinetic action. These men are not here for glory. They are not here to spread the revolution. They are debt collectors. They are border guards for a customs war. They are here to enforce a piece of paper signed in Berlin 6 years earlier. A paper designed to choke the Bank of England. Most people think Napoleon's wars were driven by one man's ambition. But when you follow the money, a completely different story emerges, one that historians have been getting wrong for over 2 centuries. The Napoleonic Wars were not simply military campaigns. They were the violent surface of the deepest economic conflict of the modern era. A financial war between Britain and France that began long before Napoleon ever picked up a sword. To understand why 500,000 men are about to face a terminal outcome in the snow, you have to stop looking at cavalry charges. You have to look at ledgers. You have to look at the mathematics of compound interest. The true origin of this global conflict starts 100 years earlier. 1688, the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange crosses the English Channel with a Dutch army. He brings more than soldiers. He brings Dutch bankers. He brings a financial technology that will change the world. 6 years later, the Bank of England is founded in 1694, a private syndicate lending money to the Crown at 8% interest. This is the machine. It allows the British state to spend money it does not have, to fight wars on credit, to fund armies today and let unborn generations pay the bill. For this, kings hoarded gold. When the gold ran out, the war stopped. The Bank of England changed the rules of reality. Debt became a weapon. A sovereign bond market was born. Investors across Europe bought British debt, tying their personal fortunes to British victory. The debt machinery let Britain outspend every rival on earth. By the end of the 18th century, Britain is carrying a national debt that would bankrupt any other nation. But they do not collapse. They collect taxes efficiently. They pay the interest on time. They roll the principal over. The British Navy is not built with timber. It is built with paper. It is built with consols, the perpetual bonds that pay 3% forever. By 1750, these consols are traded daily in the coffee houses of Exchange Alley. A liquid market for government debt means the state can always find cash. The Bank of England acts as the ultimate guarantor, keeping discount rates stable. Look at the other side of the English Channel. France, the wealthiest nation in Europe. More land, more people, more resources. Yet France is financially crippled. They do not have a modern central bank. They have tax farmers, corrupt middlemen who skim off the top. When the French crown runs out of money, they default. They execute their creditors. They debase the coinage. The aristocracy refuses to pay taxes. The resulting deficit triggers the French Revolution in 1789. The revolutionaries need money to survive. They confiscate the lands of the Catholic Church. They issue paper currency backed by the stolen land, the assignats. It works for a few months. Then they print more and more. The printing presses run day and night. By 1795, the assignat has lost 99% of its value. Bread prices explode from a few sous to hundreds of francs. A loaf of bread requires a wheelbarrow of paper. The bodily reality of this inflation is catastrophic. Urban workers cannot afford calories. Starvation becomes a daily metric in Paris. The terminal outcome of this hyperinflation is thousands of citizens perishing from malnutrition while speculators hoard grain. Riots tear through the streets. Into this chaos steps a young artillery officer from Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte. He takes power in a coup. He inherits a bankrupt state. The currency is worthless. The treasury is empty. The armies are unpaid and mutinous. Napoleon hates debt. He saw the assignat destroy his country. He refuses to borrow on international markets. He demands hard currency, gold and silver, plunder from conquered territories. He founds the Banque de France in 1800, but keeps it under tight control. He wants a balanced budget. But a balanced budget cannot compete with the Bank of England. This is the impossible problem. Napoleon has the best army in the world. Britain has the best bank in the world. Napoleon can win every land battle. He can smash the Austrians at Austerlitz. He can crush the Prussians at Jena. But he cannot touch London. Britain just opens its checkbook. They subsidize coalition after coalition. They pay Russian emperors and Austrian generals to keep fighting. Millions of pounds sterling flow across the continent. Pitt's gold, they call it. The British are outsourcing the kinetic action. They are paying foreign peasants to bleed so British merchants can trade. Historian Niall Ferguson argues that the British financial system was the ultimate decider of the war. Others disagree, pointing to the sheer tactical genius of the French army holding out for decades against impossible odds. But the math is undeniable. By 1806, Napoleon realizes he cannot defeat Britain on the battlefield. He does not have a navy after Trafalgar. He cannot invade. So he decides to destroy their credit. He signs the Berlin Decree. He initiates the Continental System, a total embargo on British goods across all of Europe. If Britain cannot export, they cannot earn gold. If they cannot earn gold, they cannot pay the interest on their massive national debt. The Bank of England will fail. The coalitions will run out of money. The war will end. It is a brilliant, ruthless calculation, but it requires absolute compliance. Every port from Lisbon to St. Petersburg must be closed to British ships. One leak, and the whole system fails, and leaks appear immediately. British goods are cheaper and better. European consumers want them desperately. The price of sugar and coffee in Paris skyrockets to 10 times the London price. A pound of indigo dye becomes worth its weight in silver. Smuggling becomes the largest industry on the continent. Fishermen from Normandy row across the channel at midnight to trade French brandy for British textiles. The British government actively supports it. They issue fake papers to merchant ships, and working in the shadows is a network of financiers who profit from both sides, the Rothschild family. Mayor Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt sends his son Nathan to England. Nathan sets up in Manchester, then London. He understands the exchange rates. He understands how to move value across closed borders. When the British army under the Duke of Wellington lands in Spain to fight the French, Wellington has a problem. He has British paper money, but the Spanish locals demand gold. Wellington is broke. The British government cannot physically transport gold past French cruisers. Nathan Rothschild steps in. He buys gold from the East India Company. He smuggles it across the English Channel to his brothers in France. Yes, right through Napoleon's territory. The brothers cash it in Paris, buy bills of exchange on Spanish bankers, and funnel the money directly to Wellington's army. The Rothschild network outmaneuvered Napoleon's customs agents. They weaponized the very financial system Napoleon tried to isolate. A banking establishment on both sides profited no matter who won. They collected commissions on the smuggling, interest on the loans, and arbitrage on the exchange rates. To stop the leaks, Napoleon has to expand his empire. He cannot stop. The financial logic dictates his military strategy. Portugal refuses to join the embargo. So Napoleon invades the Iberian Peninsula. He installs his brother on the Spanish throne. It is a catastrophic error. The Spanish people rise up in a guerrilla war. It becomes a bleeding ulcer. Hundreds of thousands of French soldiers face a terminal outcome in the mountains of Spain, bogged down in endless kinetic action, all to enforce a customs line. But the fatal blow comes from the east. Tsar Alexander of Russia. The Russian economy relies on exporting timber, grain, and hemp to Britain. The Continental System is bankrupting the Russian nobility. Alexander cannot afford to maintain the embargo. He opens his ports. He allows British ships to dock under neutral flags. Napoleon knows this is the end. If Russia defects, the Continental System collapses. British credit survives. France loses the financial war. So, Napoleon gathers 500,000 men. The Grande Army, June 1812, the Niemen River. We are back where we started. Napoleon is not invading Russia to conquer territory. He is invading to force Alexander back into the boycott. He expects a quick victory, a border skirmish, a treaty, and a return to Paris. But the Russians retreat. They burn their own crops. They destroy their own collateral. They trade space for time. Napoleon marches all the way to Moscow. He takes the city. But Tsar Alexander refuses to negotiate. Then Moscow burns. There is no food. There is no shelter. There is no gold. Napoleon orders the retreat. The Russian winter descends. It is not just the weather that destroys the army. It is a failure of logistics, fundamentally a failure of finance. Napoleon cannot supply an army across that distance without paying locals for supplies, and his treasury cannot sustain it. His reliance on plunder fails when there is nothing left to steal. The retreat from Moscow costs hundreds of thousands of lives. The system cost millions of lives in total. A horrific terminal outcome for a continent Caught in a proxy war between two financial architectures, sensing blood, the rest of Europe rises up. The Sixth Coalition forms. And who funds them? London. Nathan Rothschild coordinates the largest transfer of funds in history up to that point. Millions of pounds in subsidies flow to Prussia, Russia, and Austria. The Bank of England prints the money. The British government issues the bonds, the investors buy them, and the Rothschilds deliver the gold to the front lines. Napoleon fights brilliantly in 1813 and 1814. He wins battles. But he is drowning in enemy soldiers, all paid for by British credit. He is forced to abdicate. He returns for 100 days in 1815, culminating at Waterloo. But even before the first cannon fired at Waterloo, the outcome was mathematically predetermined. The British government borrowed another massive sum to put Wellington on that field and to pay the Prussians to arrive on time. Napoleon's war chest was empty. The aftermath is revealing. Napoleon is exiled to a rock in the South Atlantic. The physical threat is removed. But what happens to the financial order? The victors gather at the Congress of Vienna. They do not dismantle the banking system. They institutionalize it. The British national debt reaches staggering heights, over 200% of GDP. But they do not default. The Industrial Revolution, fueled by that same credit, generates enough wealth to slowly pay it down. The Rothschilds emerge as the undisputed masters of European finance, having profited immensely from the conflict. The French, having learned their lesson, finally adopt a stable central bank modeled loosely on the British system. The true origin of Napoleon's wars was a clash of operating systems. A modern, credit-based, debt-leveraged empire versus a traditional, land-based, hard-money conqueror. One man tried to break a financial order built by a century of compound interest. He failed. The real decisions of the era, from Austerlitz to Waterloo, were shaped not by glory or conquest, but by the mechanics of credit, debt, and currency. When you strip away the uniforms, the paintings, and the propaganda, you are left with cold mathematics. The victors write the history books, but the bankers hold the pen. The legacy of this era is the world we live in today. A world where nations fight not just with troops, but with sanctions, embargoes, and central bank reserves. This invisible war of capital shaped the modern state, but what happened when that same debt machine was turned against its own citizens half a century later during the industrial collapse? That is a story of engineered famines, corporate monopolies, and a phantom crisis that reset the global order entirely. We will decode that terminal outcome in our next dossier. If you want to understand the real levers of power that historians ignore, tell me in the comments which historical myth you want exposed next. Then hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we follow the money through the shadows of history.